For days after their escape, Sarah and Jamie felt her absence like a weight pressing on their hearts. Though they didn't fully understand what had happened, both sensed that their mother had sacrificed something profound to free them. Nights were the hardest, especially for Sarah, who found herself lying awake, hearing whispers like faint echoes. She swore she could hear her mother's voice, calling her name in the dead of night. "Jamie, did you hear that?" she whispered one night, clutching her little brother's arm. He nodded, wide-eyed. "It's Mom," he whispered back, fear and confusion evident in his eyes. And then, one evening, a faint, pulsing warmth radiated from Sarah's hand. She looked down to see a faint, pale glow, something that seemed to shimmer just under her skin. It wasn't pain, exactly, but a strange, comforting warmth. She knew instinctively it was her mother, her presence somehow lingering, trying to reach them. Days passed, and the strange glow persisted. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her mother was nearby, calling her, needing her. Despite the terror of what they had escaped, Sarah felt an undeniable pull to return to the house. Jamie, too, felt it, though younger, he sensed the same quiet longing. The house wanted them back, but their mother's spirit wanted something, too. Finally, after days of resisting, they agreed to go back, convinced that if they didn't, they'd never truly understand what happened to their mother. One night, they snuck out, careful not to wake their aunt who had been caring for them. The dark road stretched before them, a pathway leading directly to the nightmare they'd fled. As they approached the house, a strange sense of familiarity washed over them. Despite the terror, there was something oddly comforting in the silence that enveloped them, a reminder of the days when their mother was there, holding them close. But this wasn't a place of comfort anymore. As they reached the front porch, the house loomed above, silent and watchful. A faint, familiar hum resonated from within, as if the house had been waiting for them. They entered, and immediately, the air grew heavy and oppressive. Shadows flickered along the walls, twisting and shifting in ways that felt alive. And yet, they weren't entirely alone, they could feel her presence, faint but steady, guiding them through the dim, echoing hallways. As they moved deeper into the house, Jamie stopped, staring at the wallpaper, his eyes wide with terror. "Sarah, look." There, scrawled into the wallpaper in jagged, familiar handwriting, were the words, "Help me. Don't let it keep me here." Sarah's heart raced, a mixture of fear and determination flooding her veins. Her mother was alive, or at least, a part of her was, and she was trapped in this monstrous house. The house seemed to sense their intent, and the walls around them trembled, the very foundation of the house groaning as if in protest. Doors slammed shut, and the whispers turned into frantic, panicked pleas, warning them to leave. The air thickened, filled with the smell of decay, and an icy wind whistled down the hallway, chilling them to the bone. But Sarah and Jamie pressed forward, determined to find their mother. The faint glow in Sarah's hand pulsed harder, brighter, guiding them toward the basement door. "It's here," Jamie whispered, gripping his sister's hand. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the basement door. The descent into the darkness felt endless, and each step seemed to draw them deeper into a pit of despair. But as they reached the bottom, they saw her. Their mother's figure stood against the wall, her face pale and drawn, eyes wide with sorrow. She looked translucent, like a ghost caught between worlds. "Mom!" Sarah cried, rushing forward, but a shadow surged up, blocking her path. The house's voice echoed around them, a guttural, malevolent growl, "You cannot take her. She is mine." The shadow loomed, shifting and morphing, its eyes glowing red with fury. Sarah felt her knees tremble, her courage wavering. But then she felt the warmth in her hand once more, a comforting, encouraging pulse from her mother's lingering essence. "No," Sarah whispered, defiance hardening her voice. "She's our mother. You can't keep her here." The shadow lunged, its dark tendrils reaching for them. Sarah and Jamie braced themselves, feeling an intense heat radiate from within them. It was their mother's love, a final gift, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to consume them. The shadow writhed, shrieking as the light grew brighter, casting it back into the corners of the room. The house seemed to shudder in agony, its walls shaking as if ready to collapse. "Mom!" Sarah screamed, reaching out. In that instant, Emma's eyes locked onto hers, a flicker of hope shining through the despair. Her lips parted, and a whisper, almost too soft to hear, escaped her. "Run, before it's too late." But Sarah shook her head, determined. "No, Mom. We're taking you with us." With one last surge of courage, she extended her glowing hand toward her mother, the light in her palm growing so bright it nearly blinded her. The shadow recoiled, shrieking as the light touched it, burning it away, bit by bit. Emma's form grew more solid, her features coming into focus as she stepped forward, reaching for her children. The light surrounding them flared, filling the room, searing away the darkness. They clasped hands, feeling her warmth one last time. For a moment, it seemed as if they might make it, that they could pull her free from the house's grip. But then, a terrible realization settled over Emma's face, and she pulled her hand from theirs. "Go," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll always be with you, but you have to leave me here. It's the only way you'll be safe." "No, Mom." Sarah cried, but Emma shook her head. With a final, loving gaze, she touched their faces, her fingers cold but filled with warmth. Then she stepped back, and the shadows reclaimed her. The basement door flung open, and the house seemed to recoil, the oppressive energy receding as Sarah and Jamie found themselves pushed toward the exit. They stumbled up the stairs, feeling an invisible force propelling them forward, urging them to leave. As they reached the front door, they turned, casting one last look at the house. For a moment, they saw her, a faint outline, standing in the window, watching them, a sad smile on her face. Then the door slammed shut, and the house grew silent, as if it had gone back to sleep, content with its final prize. Sarah and Jamie stood outside, the cold night air stinging their skin. They felt empty, lost without her, but in their hearts, they knew she was still with them, her love forever a shield against the darkness. They would return someday, they promised themselves, and they would find a way to bring her back. But for now, they walked away, leaving the house to its slumber, a dark and hungry relic that would wait, patiently, for its next visitor. Years passed, but the memory of the house, and of the mother they'd left behind, never left Sarah or Jamie. They grew up under the weight of that terrible night, their dreams haunted by whispers, shadows, and a sense of something unfinished. Sarah, now in her late teens, could feel a strange pull toward the house stronger than ever. She knew it was time to return, to end the nightmare and finally free her mother's spirit. Jamie, who had grown into a quiet, haunted young man, agreed without hesitation. Under a stormy sky, they made their way back to the house, which stood just as they remembered, looming, quiet, and filled with the oppressive weight of the years that had passed. It was as if it had been waiting for them all along. "Ready?" Sarah asked, her hand on the front door. Jamie nodded, his face pale but determined. "We have to finish this." The door creaked open, and they stepped inside. Immediately, the house came alive, the walls trembling as the familiar whispers began to echo around them, calling their names in mocking, ghostly tones. Shadows danced in the corners of the room, watching them, shifting as they moved through the hallways. As they walked, the house twisted around them, its layout warping as if trying to trap them. The basement door appeared at the end of each hallway, no matter which way they turned, beckoning them down into the darkness below. Finally, they reached it. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door, leading Jamie down the creaking steps. The air grew colder with each step, and the familiar, sickly scent of rot filled their nostrils. At the bottom, they saw her, Emma. She stood with her back to them, her outline faint and ghostly, bound to the wall by dark, twisting vines that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "Mom!" Jamie cried, rushing forward, but as he did, the shadows around her came alive, solidifying into the monstrous figure of the house itself, an amalgamation of darkness and malice, its eyes gleaming with a ravenous hunger. "You came back," the house hissed, its voice deep and sinister. "How kind of you to return. Let her go." Sarah shouted, standing firm, though terror churned in her stomach. The house laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Why would I do that? She is mine, as you will soon be." "No," Sarah replied, her voice shaking. "I know what you are now. You feed on fear, on the souls of the living. But you made a mistake, didn't you? You took our mother before her time." The house paused, its laughter dying away. Sarah's words seemed to strike a nerve. She realized that the house wasn't as invincible as it seemed. "I'll make you a deal," she continued, her voice steady. "Take me instead. Leave my mother, and you can have my soul. Just let her go." "Sarah, no." Jamie whispered, horror etched across his face. But the house seemed to consider it, the shadows pulsing in anticipation. "Very well," it said finally. "Step forward, and she is free." Sarah took a step toward the shadows, feeling their icy grip close around her like tendrils of death. She could feel her spirit weakening, being pulled into the house's dark depths. But just as she felt herself slipping away, Jamie shouted, "Wait." He rushed forward, grabbing her hand, his eyes filled with determination. "You don't have to do this alone, Sarah. We both came here for her. We're both in this together." With a fierce look of defiance, he tightened his grip on her hand. Their combined presence seemed to push back against the house's hold, a wave of warmth and light radiating from their bond. They focused their thoughts on their mother, on the love she had given them, and on the promise they'd made to free her. The light grew brighter, forcing the shadows to retreat, writhing as if in agony. The house trembled, its foundations shuddering as the siblings' love burned away its darkness. The figure of their mother became clearer, more solid. Emma's eyes filled with tears as she reached out to her children, her spirit released from the house's grip. "Mom!" Sarah cried, her voice choked with emotion. Emma embraced them, her presence warm and real. "Thank you, both of you," she whispered. "You freed me." But the house wasn't ready to give up. It roared in fury, the shadows converging into a massive, writhing form that loomed over them, filling the entire basement. Its voice thundered around them, "You cannot leave. You are mine." Realizing there was only one way to end this, Emma turned to her children, her face resolute. "Get out, both of you. I'll hold it back long enough for you to escape." "No, Mom." Jamie protested, but she shook her head. "You have your lives ahead of you," she said, her voice fierce. "I can keep it at bay, but you need to go now." With tears in their eyes, Sarah and Jamie obeyed, racing up the stairs as the house groaned and shook, trying to trap them. As they reached the front door, they looked back one last time to see Emma standing defiantly against the darkness, her light burning like a beacon. Then, with a final, painful crack, the house began to collapse, its walls folding in on themselves as if devouring its own heart. The siblings ran outside, watching as the structure caved in, consumed by its own malevolence. As the sun began to rise, the house lay in ruins, nothing but a smoldering heap of rubble. The shadows had vanished, leaving a profound silence in their wake. Sarah and Jamie stood together, holding hands, feeling both sorrow and relief. Their mother was gone, but she had given them the greatest gift she could, their freedom. They looked at each other, understanding that they had survived not just the house, but the darkness that had haunted their family. And as they walked away, they felt a warmth, a quiet assurance that their mother's spirit would always be with them, watching over them, free at last from the horrors of the house. They had finally broken the curse.